Short is the story, long is the life.
Wukong's Archive presents China Urban Legends EP16. The Tiexi Ghost Building of Shenyang. Part 1. Narrator. What is Tiexi District? Narrator. If you walk through Tiexi District, you might feel like you've entered a city forgotten by time. The streets are wide, but the pavement is full of potholes. On both sides of the road grow thick plane trees, their summer shade covering the entire street. Those trees were planted in the 1950s, not by the municipal landscaping department, but by the factories. Beneath every old plane tree in Tiexi District lies a factory pipe. Narrator. Tiexi was once the most factory-dense area in all of China. Starting in the 1930s, the Japanese built factories here. After the September 18 incident, the Guangdong Army occupied Shenyang, then called Fengtian, and designated Tiexi District as a South Manchuria railway, launching massive construction projects. The Japanese built steel mills, machinery factories, aircraft parts factories, and gunpowder plants here. The entire Tiexi District was one giant military factory. When the Japanese surrendered and withdrew in 1945, they left behind over 300 factories in Tiexi. The Soviet Red Army came through and dismantled whatever machinery they could carry away. Then in 1948, Shenyang was liberated, and these factories became state-owned enterprises. Narrator. In the 1950s and 60s, Tiexi District entered its golden age. A quarter of the nation's steel, machine tools, cables, and transformers were produced here. Tiexi had hundreds of thousands of workers. Every morning at 5:20, factory sirens rang across the entire district. People in Tiexi didn't call themselves Shenyang natives back then, they called themselves Tiexi people. Tiexi people looked down on those living in the city center, like country bumpkins. Narrator. But in the 1990s, everything changed. Narrator. State-owned enterprise reform. Mass layoffs. One by one, Tiexi's factories shut down. By 2000, half of Tiexi's factories had stopped operating. Factory floors stood empty. Workers left. The worker housing compounds emptied too. Residential blocks that once housed thousands of families were reduced to just a few elderly residents. The abandoned factories rusted in the wind and rain, their windows stripped and sold, their slogans washed away by rain until only outlines remained. Entire swaths of the district became urban wilderness.
Narrator. It was against this backdrop, reporter Zhao said, that the legend of the Tiexi Ghost Building began to spread.
Part 2. Narrator. The Tiexi Ghost Building is located in northern Tiexi District, near the intersection of Bayer Road and Baogong Street. Narrator. This was a worker housing complex built in the 1970s. 6 5-story red brick buildings arranged around a courtyard. Each building had the same layout, 5 stories, 3 stairwells, 3 apartments per floor. Of these 6 buildings, 4 are still inhabited today, 1 was demolished in 2005, and the remaining one, the one called the Ghost Building, has neither been torn down nor inhabited. It stands alone on a construction site, surrounded on all sides by leveled ground. Only it remains. Tall weeds grow all around it, waist-high. The red brick walls have darkened to a rusty brown after years of exposure to the elements. All the windows have lost their glass, gaping open like hundreds of eyeless sockets. Narrator. Reporter Zhao first heard about this building in 2005. He had just joined the newspaper and was following a senior reporter covering demolition news in Tiexi. The senior reporter pointed at the building and said, "That one. Nobody dares touch it."
Narrator. Zhao asked why.
Narrator. Senior reporter. Go ask the demolition crew.
Narrator. Zhao did go ask. A foreman from the demolition crew told him they had received the order to demolish that building. The day the bulldozer drove up to the site, when it got to about 10 meters in front of the building, it suddenly stalled. No matter what they did, it wouldn't start. They brought in a second bulldozer. Same thing, stalled at the exact same spot. A third bulldozer, same result. The foreman said they'd been in demolition for over a decade and had seen all kinds of strange things: steel rebar caught in tracks, foundations too hard to break, residents refusing to leave and blocking the door, but a bulldozer stalling automatically in front of a building? That was a first. The fuel systems on all three machines were fine. The electrical systems were fine. They just wouldn't start. Pull the bulldozer back a few dozen meters, and it started right up. Drive it forward again, and it stalled. Like there was an invisible line. As soon as the bulldozer crossed that line, the engine died. The foreman called his supervisor, who said to leave it for now and come back in a few days. A few days turned into forever. Narrator. Zhao said that story, the bulldozer that couldn't demolish it, was actually the least remarkable of all the legends surrounding that building.
Part 3. Narrator. What really made this building famous happened in 2003. Narrator. That summer, strange things started happening near Bayer Road in Tiexi at night. Residents nearby said that between 2 and 3 in the morning, they could hear sounds coming from the abandoned building. Not wind. Not rats scurrying. It was a rhythmic, muffled knocking sound. Like someone hitting something with a hammer. Thump. 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 About every 2 or 3 seconds, very regular. Sometimes it lasted an hour or two. Sometimes it went intermittently through the entire night. Narrator. At first, nearby residents assumed someone was stealing things inside. There were so many abandoned factories in Tiexi that people often went in to rip out radiators, strip copper wiring, or remove window frames and doors to sell as scrap. Someone called the police. Police officers came, went inside with flashlights, and searched the entire building thoroughly. Every room, from the first floor to the 5th. Nobody. No tools. Nothing that could make that sound. And strangely, while the police were searching, the sound stopped. As soon as they left, it started again. Narrator. After this happened 3 or 4 times, the nearby residents began to circulate a different explanation. Narrator. Some said that before liberation, that building had been a secret Japanese factory. Someone posted online claiming that their grandfather had worked as a laborer in Tiexi's Japanese factories. According to the grandfather, there was another floor beneath that building. No, not 1 floor, 3 floors underground. Dug by the Japanese. Very deep. The grandfather said the Japanese didn't allow any Chinese to approach that building's basement. Anyone who got close was arrested, and nobody ever saw those people again. When the Japanese surrendered, the entrance to that basement was blown up. Nobody knows what's inside. Nobody dares to dig.
Narrator. Zhao investigated this claim. He went to the Shenyang Municipal Archives and pulled the pre-liberation urban planning maps of Tiexi district. The maps did show that several special buildings had been constructed on that plot during the Japanese occupation, but their purpose was not indicated. The planning map simply stated factory annex, 4 characters, nothing more. There was no marking for 3 underground levels. But Zhao said the Japanese did indeed dig a lot of things underground in Tiexi. Shenyang is one of the cities with the most complex underground infrastructure in China. During the South Manchuria Railway period, the Japanese built underground facilities, some of which haven't even been fully discovered to this day. In 2004, when Shenyang was building Subway Line 1, workers dug up a Japanese-built tunnel under Tiexi. The tunnel was about 2 meters wide, 2 meters tall, its wall smoothly finished with cement. The tunnel's end was sealed by a thick concrete wall. The construction crew drilled a hole through it and found empty space on the other side. But nobody knew where it led, and nobody dared to keep digging. The project managers ultimately decided to reseal the opening and continue laying track according to the original plan. Zhao said similar discoveries happened more than once during underground construction in Tiexi.
Part 4.
Narrator. Zhao told me he spent the better part of a year investigating that building, on and off.
Narrator. He found the former housing management office responsible for the 6-building compound. The office had been restructured, the old building sold to private owners, but one retired old administrator was still living in Shenyang. The administrator, surnamed Zhang, was in his 70s. He'd worked at the Tiexi housing office for over 30 years and knew the 6 buildings inside and out. Old Zhang told him the 6 buildings were built in 1973, standard 3-stairwell, 5-story worker housing, using the most conventional brick and concrete structural design of the era. Nothing special. The people who lived here were workers from various Tiexi factories, mostly from the Shenyang heavy machinery plant and the Shenyang cable factory. Starting in the late 1980s and early 90s, residents began moving out one by one. Not because there was anything wrong with the building itself, but because the factories in that area were shutting down one after another. Workers lost their jobs, lost their income, and had to move south to find work or relocate elsewhere. By 1998, 2/3 of the building stood empty. Fewer and fewer people remained, until only 2 families on the first floor were left. Narrator. Those 2 families eventually moved out too. Old Zhang said they left in the middle of the night, without telling anyone. By the time others noticed they were gone, several days had passed. The doors weren't locked. Their belongings were still inside: pots, pans, tables and chairs. The calendar on the wall was still turned to September. But the people had vanished. They asked every neighbor in the area. Nobody saw them leave. Nobody saw them move. It was as if those 2 families had disappeared into thin air. Narrator. Old Zhang said he later looked up the files of both families. One family was named Wang. The husband, Wang Zhangwo, had worked at the Shenyang transformer factory for over 20 years as a senior technician before being laid off. His wife worked at the Shenyang textile mill, which also closed. She had no formal job. They had a son studying at Shenyang University of Technology. The other family was an old man named Liu who lived alone. He had been a grade 8 fitter at the Shenyang heavy machinery plant, worked there his whole life until retirement. His wife had passed away a few years earlier. Old Zhang said both families were honest, hard-working working-class families, no criminal record, never caused any trouble. Yet they simply vanished. The files had no contact information, nobody had cell phones back then, let alone WeChat, and they couldn't be found. Old Zhang later tried checking through the police station. The household registration records showed that neither family had gone through the procedure to transfer their household registration elsewhere. They hadn't officially moved anywhere. They had simply disappeared.
Narrator. Zhao was particularly bothered by the fate of those 2 families. He checked nearby hospitals and funeral homes. No death records. He went to Shenyang University of Technology and asked about the Wang son. The school said that student had withdrawn in 1999 for family reasons. The specific reasons weren't recorded in the file, and the person who handled it was long gone. Zhao said the disappearance of those 2 families was the most bone-chilling part of the entire affair. Because all the other paranormal phenomena, the sounds, the shadows, the symbols, could be explained in different ways. But 2 living people, with all their belongings and their entire lives, just disappeared in Shenyang. Their household registration wasn't transferred. No death was registered. Even their son dropped out of university. No trace left behind. As if someone had deliberately erased every sign of their existence.
Part 5.
Narrator. Zhao actually went inside that building in the autumn of 2006.
Narrator. He said he made up his mind and went that day. Around 2 in the afternoon, when the sunlight was strongest. He figured it would be safe during the day. He brought a flashlight, a camera, a voice recorder, and a military knife. When he reached the building's entrance, he noticed the iron gate was ajar, the heavy padlock pried open. He pushed the door open. A wave of damp, musty air hit him, like something had been fermenting in the darkness for a very long time. The stairwell walls were covered in black stains, impossible to tell whether they were water stains or something else. The iron handrails were thick with dust. He said when he carefully placed his foot on the first step, he heard a very faint echo from the concrete beneath him, not a solid sound. Hollow. As if the stairwell was empty underneath. Narrator. He reached the second floor. The corridor was piled with junk, broken cabinets, rotten bedboards, shattered glass, a disassembled sewing machine. Every room door stood open, the rooms empty inside. He shone his flashlight into a south-facing room. In the corner stood an overturned table, thick with dust. On the wall hung an old-fashioned round vanity mirror, its surface also thickly coated with dust. When he shone the light on it, he saw a character someone had written on the mirror with their finger. Not recent, the dust had settled evenly, indicating the writing had been there for a long time. The character was large, almost filling the entire mirror. One character, Geo.
Narrator. Zhao said his heart tightened. He couldn't describe the feeling. As if something was warning him to leave, and he had no idea what that something was or why. He stood there for a moment, collected himself, and continued upward.
Narrator. The third and fourth floors were much the same. Empty rooms, broken furniture, graffiti on the walls. The graffiti was all similar, simple curse words, a crudely drawn sun, and the characters for Japan. Zhao said that at the end of the fourth floor corridor, one room was different from all the others, its door was closed. Every other door on the floor stood open. Only this one was tightly shut. It was an old wooden door painted green, most of the paint peeled away to reveal the gray wood beneath. The crucial detail was that the door had been wired shut from the outside with thick wire. The wire was wrapped around several times, twisted around nails driven into the door frame, as if someone had deliberately sealed this door. To keep others from entering. And to keep whatever was inside from getting out.
Narrator. Zhao said standing before that door, he felt something very powerful. Not fear. Not terror. He said it was a biological instinct. Like walking through the wilderness and suddenly catching a certain scent, your brain tells you, danger. That feeling doesn't come from the cerebral cortex. It rises from the very base of your spine, bypassing all conscious thought. His hand reached out and touched the wire. Then stopped. He thought about it. He pulled his hand back. He later told me he made a decision he still can't say was right or wrong. He didn't open that door. He turned and walked away.
Narrator. When he reached the fifth floor, he found something. A window at the end of the fifth floor corridor. The glass was long gone. Wind blew in from outside, lifting a piece of paper from the floor, sending it spinning through the air before it settled again. He walked over and picked it up. The paper was yellowed and brittle, its edges rotted away by rain. The writing on it was crooked, as if written with charcoal, parts of it blurred beyond recognition by rainwater. But he could make out a few characters, Japanese, underground, don't come down.
Narrator. Zhao said, holding that paper. His hands trembled slightly. Who wrote this paper? When? Why was it on the 5th floor corridor? What was the writer trying to warn against? These questions circled in his mind without any answer. But that paper made him decide he needed to find the basement of this building. Because he had a growing feeling that the answer to all of this building's secrets lay in the deepest level.
Part 6. Narrator. The basement entrance was at the turn of the first-floor stairwell. An old iron door, secured with a heavy iron chain and a large rusty padlock. The chain and lock were rusted beyond recognition, layers of rust flaking off and staining the concrete beneath a rusty red. Zhao pried the lock open with his military knife. When he pulled the chain aside, it scraped against the iron door with a piercing screech. The moment the iron door opened, a blast of cold air rushed out from within. That air carried a smell Zhao said he would never forget for the rest of his life, a smell of rust, so thick it was almost suffocating. But mixed with the rust was a sweet odor, like something that had been rotting underground for countless years. That smell wasn't recent. It had accumulated in the basement for who knows how many decades, and when the iron door opened, it all came rushing out at once. Narrator. Behind the door was a staircase heading down. Concrete stairs, very steep, only 2/3 the width of a normal staircase. Walking down, your shoulders would nearly brush against the walls on both sides. And the stairs were spiral, not straight, turning several times. Zhao said as he descended, shining his flashlight at his feet. The concrete surface was very uneven, as if poured hastily with the roughest workmanship. The walls weren't smooth either, they showed water seepage marks, dark streaks like groundwater drawing on the walls. After about 3 or 4 turns down, the rust smell grew stronger. Narrator. At the bottom of the stairs was a basement space of about 20 square meters. The ceiling was low, standing straight, he could almost touch it with his fingertips. A layer of water covered the floor, about ankle deep. When the flashlight beam hit the water, he saw it was dark red. Zhao said at first he thought it was the color of the floor tiles, maybe red anti-rust paint. But looking more closely, the water really was red. When he stepped in, the splash stained his pant legs the same dark red. He knelt down, shone the light on the water's surface, and saw the color was uniformly rusty red, not paint leaching into water, but genuine rust-colored water. He walked around that basement and saw things that left him speechless. Several grooves were cut into the concrete floor, straight channels about 10 centimeters wide and 5 deep, spaced at intervals like drainage ditches. But the ends of those ditches didn't lead to drains, they converged into a circular pit. The pit was about 1/2 meter in diameter, filled with dark red water, bottomless. The arrangement of these grooves and the pit was very regular, as if deliberately designed, not ordinary industrial drainage. The walls showed old mounting marks, expanding bolt holes arranged in regular patterns, as if some equipment or rack had once been fixed there. Narrator. Standing there, Zhao suddenly felt the temperature drop. Not gradually, a sudden drop of several degrees. He was wearing an autumn jacket, but the hairs on his arms stood on end, and his back felt as if an ice pack had been pressed against it. Then he heard a sound. Narrator. The sound was very faint, as if coming from very, very deep underground. But the basement was silent to an extreme, you could hear your own heartbeat, so that sound was exceptionally clear. The sound of a hammer striking. Thump. 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 The intervals were very regular, about 2.5 seconds apart. Exactly as the nearby residents had described. Zhao said the first thing he did was turn off his flashlight. Complete darkness. He couldn't see anything, so dark he couldn't even see his own outstretched fingers. But the sound didn't stop. It became clearer. The sound wasn't coming from above or around him, it was coming from beneath his feet. From even deeper down, through the concrete floor and layers of earth. He crouched down, pressed his palm against the water on the floor, and felt a faint vibration. It wasn't his imagination. Something was really knocking. Beneath this basement, there was another level. And in that level, something alive was moving. Part 7. Narrator. When Zhao emerged from the building, it was nearly dusk. Narrator. He stood at the entrance. The sun was setting behind the distant factory chimneys in the west, painting the Tiexi sky in that gray-red color unique to industrial cities. His pant legs were soaked. His sneakers were stained with dark red mud. He looked back at the building. Through the broken fifth-floor window, something moved. He didn't see it with his eyes, he caught it in his peripheral vision. He whipped his head around and stared at that window. A gray shape flickered in the window opening, then vanished. Zhao said it wasn't the wind, there was no wind that afternoon. That shape, when he tried hard to recall it later, he thought it might have been a face. But he said he couldn't be sure, because it was too fast for his eyes to focus. Narrator. Back at the newspaper office, Zhao began researching Tiexi district's history extensively. He went to the Liaoning Provincial Archives and pulled part of the South Manchuria Railway period files, the ones that hadn't been transferred to Japan. And he actually found some valuable leads. He found a 1942 Guangdong Army order. The document number was encrypted. Its content was the requisition of a 1,200 square meter plot of land on Bayer Road in Tiexi for the construction of a special factory. The order didn't specify what this special factory was for, what it would produce, or who would operate it. But the document type carried the Imperial Japanese Army's classified designation, and the construction standard was marked as special grade, far above ordinary factories and warehouses. At the end of the order was a note, which translated to, underground facility excavation depth shall be no less than 15 meters. All entrances shall be sealed upon completion of the main structure. The surface building exterior shall match ordinary civilian architecture. Narrator. 15 meters. 5 floors deep. Zhao stared at that number, a chill running down his spine. By standard building floor heights, 15 meters was equivalent to 4 or 5 stories, 4 to 5 levels underground. And when the worker housing was built on that plot in the 1973, the foundation was dug only 3 meters deep. Which meant that the entire underground space below 3 meters, the construction workers had never seen it. Or rather, those who had seen it never had the chance to speak about it.
Narrator. Zhao found an old construction worker who had participated in building the 6 residential buildings. It took a lot of effort, tracking him down through a retired engineering supervisor. The worker, surnamed Sun, was already in his 70s, his hair completely white. He lived on the 6th floor of an old apartment building in Tiexi, no elevator, climbing stairs every day. Old Sun's health was okay, but his hearing wasn't good. After Zhao explained his purpose, Sun was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke about what happened back then. He said, when they were digging the foundation on that plot in 1973, they did discover something unusual. According to the blueprints, the foundation needed to be dug to 3 meters deep, standard depth for multi-story brick and concrete residential buildings. But when they got to about 3 meters, they uncovered a massive concrete slab. That slab wasn't an ordinary prefabricated panel, it was very thick, at least 30 centimeters, and it wasn't flat. It was slightly curved, like a large lid. They tried pneumatic hammers, couldn't break through. Tried crowbars, couldn't pry it open. Old Sun said the supervisor came to look at it and said it was probably an old Japanese foundation or air raid shelter cover. Forget about it, dig somewhere else. So the building's foundation was actually shifted about 2.5 meters to the west, deviating from its original design position. Old Sun said this kind of thing wasn't unusual in Tiexi. There were too many Japanese underground structures, factory foundations, drainage pipes, air raid shelters, oil storage tanks, everything. They filled the excavated pit with rubble and, burying that concrete slab underground again, then poured a new foundation on top. Narrator. Zhao asked him what was under that concrete slab? Narrator. Old Sun looked at him. A very deep look. He was silent for a very long time. Then he said one sentence. A sentence that still sends chills down Zhao's spine whenever he thinks about it.
Narrator. Old Sun. Someone went down to look. Went down. Never came back up.
Narrator. Zhao pressed him. Who was that person? Old Sun refused to say. He waved his hand, saying it was nearly 40 years ago, and bringing it up would do nobody any good. Zhao pressed him several more times. Old Sun never relented. Finally, he said one last thing, you're a journalist. Some things, it's safer not to know. Take my advice, stop investigating that building. Narrator. Zhao didn't ask any more.
Part 8.
Narrator. Zhao later wrote this story up as an article. The newspaper never let him publish it.
Narrator. The editor-in-chief read the draft, was silent for a long time, then returned it to Zhao, saying, "This matter, it's not easy to discuss. Put it aside for now. We'll revisit it when the time is right." Zhao wasn't satisfied. He took his research materials to a folklore professor in Shenyang. The professor, surnamed Zhou, was in his 60s. He taught at Liaoning University and had studied Northeast Chinese folklore and folk culture for over 30 years. After listening to Zhao's full account, Professor Zhou didn't directly answer his question. First, he told Zhao a story.
Narrator. Professor Zhou said that there is a very old folk legend circulating in the Northeast, that when the Japanese built factories here, they buried things in key underground locations. Not gold bars or treasure. Living things. The Japanese followed an ancient folk belief from their homeland, that using living sacrifices could suppress the spiritual energy of a place, make it so heavy within energy and clinging resentment that ordinary people would instinctively avoid it. That way, the secrets buried underground would never be discovered. This legend has circulated in the Northeast for many years, but no official document has ever been able to confirm it. Professor Zhou said that in his decades of studying folklore, he found a pattern. The more widespread a legend, the more likely it has some real historical foundation. Not that the content of the legend is true, but that legends arise because there is a real event acting as a seed. That seed might be very small, might be completely unrelated to the legend, but its existence fertilizes the soil in which the legend grows.
Narrator. Then Professor Zhou gave him a second possible explanation: collective hallucination and mass hysteria. He said that Tiexi's residents, in the late 1990s, experienced large-scale factory closures and unemployment on an unimaginable scale. Think about that feeling, hundreds of thousands of people, spending their entire lives in one factory, believing their iron rice bowl was unbreakable, then suddenly being nothing. Tiexi had hundreds of thousands of workers who, overnight, became people with nothing to do on the streets. Income gone. Social status gone. The meaning of each day gone. That kind of collective loss and frustration needed an outlet. And ghost stories are the best outlet. When an entire community shares the same pressure and anxiety, rumors spread very quickly, and people become very willing to believe them, because believing a supernatural story is much easier than facing a real-life problem you can't solve. Professor Zhou said that during every major economic depression in history, supernatural legends explode in number. This is no coincidence. During the Great Depression in 1930s America, stories about phantom hitchhikers spread wildly across the country. After Japan's bubble economy collapsed in the 1990s, the urban legend industry experienced explosive growth. The Tiexi Ghost Building legend was essentially the same phenomenon.
Narrator. Zhao said he went home and thought about it all night. He said Professor Zhou's two explanations, whether cultural or psychological, both made a lot of sense. He almost accepted them. But there was one question he still couldn't answer: who wrote the character "Go on the Wall"? Who left the paper with Japanese, "Underground, don't come down"? Who was the construction worker that Old Sun said went down and never came back up? What was the gray shadow that moved in the fifth-floor window? And that knocking sound that rang out every single night at the same time was an entire neighborhood of laid-off workers collectively hallucinating the exact same sound, at the exact same rhythm and intensity, every night? 30 people having the same hallucination? 50? Were the dogs in the neighborhood barking at that building every night also hallucinating? Narrator. Zhao said the theory of collective hallucination could explain most supernatural legends. But it couldn't explain all the details. And a single unexplainable detail was enough to crack the entire edifice.
Part 9.
Narrator. The last time Zhao went to the Tiexi Ghost Building was in 2008.
Narrator. That year, Tiexi District began large-scale demolition and renovation. Many old factory buildings and worker housing compounds were bulldozed. Tiexi was going to change. The government had planned it as a new Tiexi district, with commercial centers and residential communities. Zhao drove over and saw from a distance that only one of the 6 buildings remained, 4 were still inhabited, 1 had been reduced to a pile of rubble, and only the ghost building stood alone in the center of a vast field of ruins. 3 excavators sat not far from it. But as Zhao approached, he noticed that the excavators were parked at exactly the same distance from the building as the bulldozers had been in 2005, about 10 meters away. Those 3 excavators sat there, surrounded by tall weeds, with no signs of having been started. As if they had been parked there for a very, very long time. Zhao asked an old man watching the construction site why the excavators hadn't been driven over to tear down the building. The old man looked at him and said, "Before you came, all 3 tried. They can't drive over there." Zhao asked what he meant by "can't drive over there." The old man said, "Get to that spot and the machine stops. Tow it out and it starts again." Spooky as hell.
Narrator. Zhao didn't ask any more. He stood at a distance and looked at the building. The setting sun shone from the west, casting the red brick building's shadow very, very long. He noticed a detail he'd never seen before. On the building's exterior wall, between the 2nd and 3rd floors, several bricks were a different color from those around them, darker, tending toward black, as if soaked through by some liquid that had long since dried. Those dark bricks weren't scattered randomly, they formed a shape. Not a picture. Closer to a symbol. Zhao pulled out his camera and took several photos. When he got home and enlarged them on his computer, he studied the symbol carefully. He couldn't identify it. It wasn't Chinese characters. It wasn't any alphabet he recognized. He later showed the photos to several knowledgeable friends. None of them could identify it. One person said it looked like a variant of Japanese characters, some archaic Japanese script. Another said it looked like some kind of religious symbol, possibly from Japanese Shinto. A third person looked at it, was silent for a long time, then sent a WeChat message, "This thing, I suggest you delete it. Don't keep it." Zhao asked him why. That person never replied.
Narrator. Zhao didn't delete it. But he never brought up those photos again. In 2009, he left Shenyang and went to a big southern city to continue his journalism career. He never went back to Tiexi district. But those photos have remained on a portable hard drive. He said that symbol still occasionally surfaces in his mind, in the middle of the night when he can't sleep, on rainy days, when he's alone in a hotel room on a business trip. That symbol seems to be etched into his brain, inextricably bound up with the memories of the Tiexi Ghost Building. No matter how hard he tries, he can't shake it. Part 10. Narrator. When I went to Shenyang on a business trip, I made a point of visiting that building. Narrator. It was autumn 2019. Tiexi district had completely transformed. The old factory district was now a cultural and creative industrial park, with cinemas and coffee shops. The worker housing had been razed, replaced by high-rise residential communities. A billboard at the entrance read, "New Tiexi District Prosperity Within." But the vacant lot at the intersection of Bayer Road and Baogong Street remained undeveloped, like a forgotten patch stitched into the new construction. The surrounding high-rises formed a pocket around it. Inside the pocket, weeds grew waist-deep, as tall as a person's calf. The red brick building still stood in the center of that empty lot. Narrator. It was more dilapidated than ever. The southeast corner of the roof had collapsed, exposing red brick and rusted rebar. Patches of brick had fallen off the exterior wall, here and there, like peeling skin. The first floor was covered in dark green moss and unknown creeping vines. All the windows gaped empty and dark, like a building that had died years ago, even the light in its eyes completely dried up.
Narrator. I stood at the edge of the lot. The weather that day was beautiful, the autumn sky over Shenyang was crystal blue, the sunlight bright and warm. But the spot where that building stood seemed to have sunlight deliberately avoiding it. Where I stood was bathed in sunlight. A few steps forward, and it was as if I had entered a shadow. Not an illusion, the building's shadow was much larger than its physical volume, like a thick black mist spreading from its base, covering the entire lot. The tips of the weeds glittered gold in the autumn sunlight, but the ring of weeds closest to the building was a gray-black color, as if something invisible had drained all the color from them. Narrator. I tried walking a few steps closer. When I got to about 20 meters from the building, I felt the temperature drop. Not psychological, the hairs on my arms really did stand up, and the back of my neck went cold. I stopped and stood there, looking at the building. It was very quiet, so quiet I could hear the rustling of wind through the weeds. Then I saw something moving in the window of the second room from the left on the second floor. Not the wind standing there, I could clearly feel the wind coming from my left, blowing my hair to the right. But the thing in that window was moving to the left, against the wind. It was moving slowly, as if something was passing slowly behind the window. Narrator. I stood there for about 3 minutes. Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard a sound. Very faint, very distant, as if coming from very deep underground. Thump. Once.
Narrator. I didn't look back. Part 11. Narrator. There are many different versions of the Shenyang Tiexi Ghost Building story. Some say it was a secret human experimentation facility run by the Japanese Guangdong Army, similar in nature to Unit 731, specializing in biological and chemical weapons research. The remains buried underground were the aftermath of their experiments. Some say the Japanese hid gold looted from all over the northeast in the basement of that building, the entrance sealed forever, never to be opened. Some say that in the 1990s, several laid-off workers committed suicide in that building, and their restless spirits have been making knocking sounds every night ever since. Some say it's nothing at all, just an ordinary abandoned old building that, because all the surrounding buildings were demolished and it stood alone, people started projecting stories onto its empty shell. But none of these explanations account for all the phenomena. Narrator. I called Zhao later. He had changed his phone number. It took me a lot of effort to track him down. He's now working as an editor at a media company in Shanghai. He's doing well. When the topic of the Tiexi Ghost Building came up, his tone was calm. He said he'd been thinking about it all these years too. He'd read books, looked up information, consulted experts. He eventually came to his own conclusion. He believes there really is something underground in that building. As for what it is, he's no longer sure he wants to know. He said some things are probably destined to never have answers. Just like the abandoned factories of Tiexi, the pipes and foundations sunken into the earth, the secret passageways sealed behind concrete. You think it's over, but it's still there, in a place you can't see, existing silently, waiting to be discovered one day, or never to be discovered at all. Narrator. That's the way Shenyang is. 300 years as a Qing dynasty capital. 14 years as a puppet capital of Manchukuo. 50 years as an industrial heartland. Each layer of history presses down on the one below it like geological strata. Some things are buried at the very bottom. Nobody knows what they are. But they really did exist once. Narrator. That building still stands on the empty lot in Tiexi district. Nobody knows when it will finally fall. Narrator. But Zhao remembers one thing. He said when he investigated the building, it looked like 5 stories from the outside. He walked from the first floor to the 5th. 18 steps per floor. 18 times 5 equals 90. But when he walked from the first floor up, he counted 19 steps to reach the 2nd floor. And then he realized something. That building doesn't have 5 floors. There's a mezzanine level between the 2nd and 3rd floors. A door wired shut with thick wire opened onto a corridor that didn't appear on any architectural drawing. He didn't open that door at the time. He's always wondered, if he had opened it, what would he have seen?
Narrator. Zhao said the answer to that question will probably never be known.
Narrator. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. New urban legend every day.